Naturally, there is a great deal of discourse on the internet of what it takes to be a great artist, what it means to be a great artist, what it means to be a good enough artist. There are a whole lot of people recording rap albums who want to share their song with you and say, do you think this is good enough? Do you think I have what it takes to be successful? Do you think I have what it takes to be a great artist? There are a lot of people writing books, producing manuscripts, producing scripts for movies to be made. And they want to ask you, do you think this is good enough? Do you think this is great? Do you think this is brilliant? Do you think I have the talent? Do you think do I have what it takes? There's not a lot of discussion about what it takes to be a member of the audience. What does it take to be a good artist, right? What does it take to be a good member of the audience? You think that's shallow? You think that's petty? You think that's ridiculous? What does it take to be a good talker? What does it take to be a good listener? Oh, if you tune in to listen to a transgender person talk about their sexuality, talk about their experience, talk about their sex life, you have to be prepared to listen. All right. As a heterosexual man, it can be very challenging and very difficult to listen to someone else who was born as a heterosexual man talk about their decision to have an operation that surgically removes their penis, and maybe to hear them talk about how happy they are that they had that operation, how glad that they feel it's the right decision. It can be just as uncomfortable to sit and listen to a video from a transgender person who had the same operation, who talks about how unhappy they are with it, how they regret it, how it was the wrong decision. And whether you're straight or gay, trans or cis or what have you, right? If you aren't sitting down, really prepared to listen to that person's perspective and experience, I think you've got to reflect on being a bad audience. Look, for people like me, I think it's important for us to reflect on being a bad artist, being a bad broadcaster, being a bad podcaster, YouTuber, whatever it is. I got things to reflect on. I got regrets. I got mistakes in my life. The very nature of a live performance of this kind is going to have imperfections in it, right? But isn't there something even more important about being a good listener that comes up in this stuff? And maybe it's most obvious when we're dealing with sexuality, because the ego of the listener is involved, right, with the performance of the broadcaster in a very explicit way when we talk about sexuality. And maybe it's more implicit, maybe it's more indirect, maybe it's more obscure when instead we're talking about politics, when instead we're talking about religion. But it's still there and it still matters, right? If I criticize Judaism, I'm ethnically Jewish, so I can get away with it, right? There are people in the audience, their ego is going to be involved in that, right? If I criticize the Catholic Church, if I criticize Islam, right? But maybe it's most blatantly obvious when we talk about sex. And what I got to say to you guys, the vast majority of you guys, is that when I talk about my sexuality and my experience in life, you are not prepared to listen. I don't think I'm unique. I think when you sit down and listen to Amber Heard talk about her sexuality, when you listen to Johnny Depp talk about his sexuality, when you listen to Tito Sam talk about his sexuality, when you listen to Daniel, aka Hiding in My Room, talk about his sexuality, I think most of the time you're sitting down and listening, and you are on a really deep level in a kind of defensive posture where you're going to leap out and invalidate and disregard whatever it is I have to say because of how it makes you feel about yourself. I've gotten a whole lot of reactions to my recent videos about Tito Sam that instead of responding to what I'm saying about him, instead of what I'm saying to members of the audience about how you ought to live your own lives, the kind of the moral to the story I'm drawing, the conclusions I'm drawing, They react by attacking me and saying that I must be lying about my sexuality, about my experience in life, that I must be on an ego trip. While I was lifting weights at the gym, it just occurred to me to count how many women attempted to rape me during high school. All right. I got up to 5. And I would say 2 of those cases would like stand up in court. The other 3, they were each very unique situations and like how I handle how good of it. Okay. That's my experience in life. Now, there are a whole lot of you guys who are going to hear that and think, oh, this guy's on a crazy ego trip. This guy thinks all women are. No, it's not a happy memory for me. It's not a boast. It's not something positive. And when I went through that in high school, I didn't even know how normal or abnormal it was, right? Talking through one of these situations. There was one girl, I'm going to say girl. I think she was a year older than me. And in high school, 1 year matters, okay? I'm still in high school. She played rugby, all right? And she tried to rape me with brute force. And it went on and on. I think it was over an hour. It was maybe an hour and a half. It didn't go on forever, right? You know, and I was saying to her, like, this wasn't a short time. This wasn't a momentary thing. I was saying to her, you've been close friends. Like, maybe I said best friends at the time. They weren't, but you've been like best friends with my girlfriend for how many years? Like, if you do this, or like what you're doing right now, like, don't you think she would hate you for the rest of your life? Like, don't you think this is going to have consequences for like your relationship with her? Like, I was talking this through with her while I was physically restraining her. And I was stronger than her. Of course, I was. She was a pretty strong teenage woman. She played sports. She worked out. She was also a very attractive. She absolutely was. She actually went to a different high school than I did, but whatever. She was one of the prettiest girls at her high school, if not the prettiest. Am I an ego trip about this? No. It was incredibly disturbing to me. Of course, it shaped the way I viewed women and relations between the sexes. And you know what really fucked me up even more was that when I described it to my girlfriend of the time, she completely laughed and dismissed it. And she said it would have been fine with her if I had sex with this girl, which disturbed the hell out of me. She acted like it was no big deal if I had sex with like her best friend, one of her close friends, whether or not it was her best friend. Like, oh yeah, that would just be nothing to her, right? I was a teenager. I wasn't. I mean, now I'm a sophisticated older man, whatever. I've got whatever perspective on life. You know what I mean? This was something where I had physically restrained someone who was trying for a long period of time to have sex with me in these weird circumstances. Okay. And guess what? That wasn't my only experience like that during high school. Okay. So point is, I come out on the internet and talk about my experience, like my perspective on sexuality. If you are going to sit down and listen to it, right? You're well within your rights to criticize me about my role as an artist, my role as an orator, my role as an author. Like, even though this is a live broadcast, there's a sense in which I'm spontaneously composing the story and telling the story and revealing it and making my argument and making my point. But there's an onus on you as well to be a good member of the audience. And it's so easy to respond in the moment to this kind of argument by saying, this guy's a narcissist. This guy's on an ego trip. This guy's making stuff up to make himself sound like he's hot. You think so? Would you say that to a woman? Would you say that to a transgender person? Do you think, like, okay, literally, hypothetical, not talking about myself. I do not consider myself a rape victim. I said there's a woman who attempted to rape me. It didn't succeed. Okay, one of them kind of did. It's a different story. One of them, I was, anyway. Oh, I honestly don't even want to tell a story. It's still disturbing to me this day. All right. I mean, anyway. Look, sorry, it is saddening to me, okay? But look, the point is whether or not I think of myself as a rape victim. are you going to say to someone, some hypothetical person who was raped during high school, that they're deluded and think they're attractive because they're a victim? There's nothing to do with it. There's nothing to do with it. Okay? Now, look, I want to talk this through just a little bit further. So, the same example, just alluded to, there was another girl who was more successful in raping me, however you want to put it. Each one of those 5 situations, very different story, very different woman, very different situation. But this girl I'm talking about, I was completely sober, like I wasn't drunk or high or out of it or anything. And she, my opinion is she was completely sober. I don't, because again, we talked, like we were talking the whole time for more than an hour. There was no sign from her that she was inebriated. And she and I talked about it years later. So I don't know, maybe it was 5 years later, but like, and again, we're talking about high school versus like end of university, like in terms of approximately, right? So maybe it was 4 years later, maybe it was 5 years later, but it was something like that. Like we were both a lot older and a lot more mature. And I said to her, look, do you remember that time when this went in? Have you ever thought about it? And she was really shocked. And we talked it through. And she talked about with me what she had gone through in her life leading up to that night and what she thought motivated it. A relatively short time before, her first serious boyfriend. So I don't know how many men she'd had sex with. I just don't know. But her first serious boyfriend, like commitment boyfriend, being together, her first serious boyfriend had died. He was hit by a train on the train tracks. So he was he wasn't inside the train. He was walking on the train tracks, and he was hit by the train. And I'll tell you exactly the scenario. We'll make a road safety exercise out of this. So he was walking down the train tracks, as is very common in the world. There were 2 sets of train tracks parallel, and he saw and heard a train coming. And instead of stepping off the train tracks, well, you shouldn't be walking on the train tracks at all. He stepped over and walked on the other set of train tracks and continued walking straight forward. And he saw and heard the train in front of him. He did not see or hear that there was another train coming behind him. Dead. There's no cause and effect relationship here. All right. Like, obviously, she was traumatized by that. As like, wasn't her fault. She didn't feel guilty. But look, I know a lot of other things about that girl's, because again, we talked years later. We got together and had coffee a number of times, basically. I remember we had vegan Chinese food together. Actually, I remember it all. We talked about what had gone down between us in high school. And probably that's why I don't feel that bad about it today. Obviously, for me, a traumatic experience. And for her, she was sitting there really shocked by it. She didn't have amnesia or something. I think it is fair to say it happened, and then she just never let herself think about it again. And I know my girlfriend at the time, who I told about it, I know she had talked to her about it. So that was at least one time she was reminded of it, because my girlfriend took her aside and said, look, why did you try to have sex with my boyfriend, kind of thing. And I don't know what came out of that conversation, but that was, I just say, in terms of forgetting it, that was at least one reminder that she got at that time. Now, guys, there are very few of us who really want to come out on the internet and talk this way about our lives earnestly, right? It's on you. It's on you to really have the detachment and compassion to be an audience for it. And you can criticize me. You can think about this analytically. You can, look, if someone wanted to send me an email tomorrow saying that they think this one event is a bigger deal in my life than I realize it is, and that this had later repercussions for my marriage to my first wife and my divorce, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying you have to think I'm a good guy. You can say I'm not looking for the moral high ground here. I don't care. I'm not doing this to make myself seem like a good person or make myself seem like a bad person. I have no interest in that. And in a sense, if I did, I wouldn't be telling these stories, right? one of the main reasons why people won't come out and speak honestly about their experience sexually is precisely that they fear being judged and lambasted for quote unquote being a narcissist, for being for being on an ego trip, for trying to manipulate the audience, for trying to present themselves as an alpha male. There's another one I got. Oh, you're just trying to look alpha, right? I remember I heard a gay guy talking on YouTube. It was about a year ago, 2 years ago, like not ancient history. And I remember he was just saying that his experience as a young gay man, I think he was talking about like basically age 16 to 26 or something. He said that he knew a lot of gay men who were very frustrated and resentful because they had crushes on people that went unfulfilled. They had a lot of heartbreak and disappointment, but that wasn't his experience. His experience was he was a charismatic YouTube star kind of person, and he got all the boys he wanted. People were pursuing him, and everyone he pursued was interested in him, and so on and so forth. That I don't know how many sexual partners he had, but that his experience of sexuality in his younger years wasn't one of repression, frustration, and guilt. Which, if it is your experience, come on YouTube and talk about that. That's great, right? But like what we have going on in the world right now, whether you're gay or straight, but in this specific regard, I think it's actually worse to be straight. I'll say this, whether you're a heterosexual woman or a heterosexual man, I think that you're actually at a disadvantage being straight as opposed to being gay or transsexual, right? Like the bias, the frame of YouTube brings to this, the bias the internet brings to this, is that you're only welcome to talk honestly about your sexuality if you're a loser, if you're a victim, if you're self-hating, if you're shy, if you lack self-confidence, if you're this kind of self-recriminating loser, and like none of the winners are going to come out and speak. Like nobody's going to come out and just say, yeah, you know what? My experience was I made no effort at all. And like 5 of the most attractive women in my high school, they all came at me and tried to sleep with me. And this is my experience. Now I have to reflect on it. I don't know why. And maybe that's influenced me in a bad way too. Like maybe it's not bragging. Maybe it's like, okay, when I look back, now I have to think about that. And even that one example I just mentioned of a girl that was strong arm rape. She was physically trying to force me to have sex with her through brute strength. I was stronger than her, but she was actually pretty strong, as mentioned. She played sports at the time, and so on and so forth. And anyway, also, I mean, she was very attractive. She probably wasn't used to men. And I don't know how many men she did that to. I don't know if it was the only one or if she went through a string. Okay. And then you learn her side of the story, and she'd been through this remarkably traumatic experience of having her boyfriend killed by a train. I cannot comment. That's unusual. Okay, well, there's a humanity to her side of the story too. And I don't dehumanize any of the women in my life. The ones I've actually slept with and the ones I didn't sleep with or, had some kind of weird connection with. They have their own story. They have their own tragedy or they have their own triumph, right? That may be known to me or may remain unknown. If I hadn't met up with that woman years later and gotten to know her better, right? How much would I really know about what was going on her side of things? That for me unforgettable night, right? Yes, when I was in high school, my experience was of being pursued by women my own age, including like the most attractive and the most quote unquote high status girls in the school. No, not all of them. How many people are in a high school anyway? But yeah, several of them. And I'll tell you 2 things right now. I was a kid. For part of this story, I was a virgin. I mean, I lost my virginity during high school, right? I didn't think I was special. Like for all I knew, like all teenage guys were going through this. I didn't know it was exceptional. I really didn't. It's not about Europe. I'm a night. I don't know anything. Nobody's talking to me about this. Nobody says this is special or extraordinary. And these women, sorry, when I'm talking about the women who really came at me aggressively, one of them was an actress at the time, and she'd done runway modeling. I believe she was 2 years older than me. All right. One of them went on to be a TV presenter. She'd also done modeling. I don't think she was successful, but like these are women who objectively or socially were considered really good looking. Another one So this is a different girl, but she was an athlete. And sorry, I don't want to give away if someone could go through the high school yearbook or something. I think she was 1 year older than me, and an athlete on one of the sports teams. Anyway, tremendously attractive, tremendous physical shape. All right, you know, like, what do I know about high school? What do I know about sexuality when I'm actually a teenager? So what are we talking about here? Like 15, 16? Are we even talking about 17, I guess? You know what I mean? I only knew my own direct experience and what I'd seen on movies and TV shows, right? And if you grew up watching any fucking, you know, mainstream Hollywood movies about high school, you know what I'm saying? Uh, what were the movies at that time? There were all these cheerleader movies. There's all this, but there were also even like the horror movies set in with high school. You know, like they all have actors who are like 25 playing roles that are 15. By the way, right? They all have these, seriously, the actors are like 23 playing 17. So they're people who are more physically mature. They're playing the roles in a way that's more emotionally mature, more eloquent than a real teenager. Real teenagers talk like in this, very staccato, broken sentences. They're not eloquent. They're not charismatic. They don't know what they're doing with their lives, right? Like in Hollywood movies, routinely portray high school students as really leading mature adult lives, like 30-year-olds. I remember even a comedy. It was a comedy called The Hot Chick, starring Rob Schneider. So have you seen that one? It was a hit film. Even like some of the Tina Fey high school movie, But just to stick with The Hot Chick for one sec, Rob Schneider comedy. It shows the female lead characters going to get cocktails at a bar in the United States of America. These are high school students, not college students. And this is in America where the minimum age is 21. Minimum age to go into a bar, to go into a nightclub. And they all walk in and they're totally self-confident and relaxed, going into a bar and ordering cocktails. And they would have been maybe 17. Like when you're in high school in the United States of America, like you can be 18 and still be in high school. But you're talking about people 16, 17, 18, going to a bar and a nightclub. That is routine in Hollywood movies. In terms of how high school is depicted in Hollywood movies, in, TV series, this kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Sorry, do you want to talk about, like that? I don't know how that influenced you, but like to a massive extent, like what is your expectation of age? My point is just to say I was completely ignorant. I didn't know what was normal for a sex life in high school. And I certainly didn't get it from my parents. But in terms of TV and movies, the only source of information I have other than my direct experience, I don't know what's normal or unusual. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I haven't seen it because it was the generation, or maybe
a
generation or two before me. But there was a famous movie called Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yes, right.
For talking about sexually promiscuous high schoolers.
Yes.
And,
I think that was one of those that created the genre. But so like already in the 1980s, and just interestingly, one of the most influential films at the time was actually a pair of Israeli filmmakers. There were two guys who worked together. They made a film first in Israel, and then they made an American version of the film. But yeah, in the 80s, but you can even go back to the 1970s and 1960s. Grease, the musical Grease, But I would definitely say in the decade of the 80s, that genre was created. And then by the 90s, you were dealing with it being a hackneyed, well-established set of tropes. Like everyone knew what to expect from the sexy high school comedy, sexy high school drama, but even the horror pictures and action pictures. There was a hit movie, I remember then, which was about high school students fighting against space aliens. You know what I'm saying? But, so it was a kind of sci-fi action movie. And the horror films, but still the way high school students were depicted in that. Now, look, again, this is before the internet and whatever else. I only knew people who talked to me. So, like, this is the life I'm leading. I don't know what the guys who are on the football team, right? Like, I met and talked to a couple of them for like a couple minutes. I don't know what their lives are like. Like, for all I know, they have 10 times as many women initiating sex with them. But like, sorry, digression from a digression. But like the point is, like, okay, yes, when I was in high school, I knew what it was like to have grown women, like whatever, women 25. But when you're 17, 25 is old. Like these are adult women with jobs. They have their own apartment. They have their own car. If a 25-year-old woman tries to sleep with you when you're 17, and again, reverse the genders, right? this has a really strange effect. You, whoa, okay. Like my experiences already at the high school stage were really of managing aggression from female sexuality, right? Now, look, okay, I've already kind of indicated the dark side of this or the sad side of this, right? Like it's in a lot of ways, it's just horrible. And I think a lot of women can relate to this. If you were a good-looking woman at 17, not everyone, but there were some good-looking women at 17 who know what it's like to have older men hitting on them, to have guys in the high school really aggressively pursuing them, whatever. Okay, so like that's part of my experience. But I mean, like the positive side of it was, I think it does explain why, like when I got to Thailand, when I got to Laos, when I got to Cambodia, why it was that I was prepared. I was so well prepared to deal with having women really aggressively hit on me, women trying to have sex with me, women trying to have relationships with me. Like sometimes it's a one night stand, sometimes women want to have relationships with you. And I was really prepared to say no. I'd had to think through all those things and what does it mean to refuse someone and how do you select someone and what is it you're really looking for when you're in a situation where you're dealing with a lot of these kinds of aggressive proposals from women. So look, you know I'm really not expecting anyone to sympathize with what I'm saying here. All right, if you find this alienating, if you find this challenging to your ego, that's cool. But I'm saying analyze that. Like, there is no point in accusing me of being a liar or me of being delusional or me of being an egomaniac on that basis, right? This really is my experience. And if I were a transgender person, talking about my experience as a transgender person, if I were even a gay person, you'd be willing to hear it. I do think heterosexual women have the same problems as heterosexual men on this. I really do. Because with heterosexual women, everyone's so warm and welcoming and encouraging if you come out and say you're sad, you're self-pitying, you're a loser, you're a victim, nothing in your life turned out the way you wanted to, whether that's because the particular men you got with were bad to you, like you were mistreated by your boyfriends or husbands, or that's because you just never got the men you pursued and desired, so on and so forth. Chris asks, did I miss the commentary on Amber Heard? No, Chris, it's coming up. We're getting there. I got things to say about Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Take a second, hit thumbs up if you have a chance, guys. We got 28. Yeah. Yeah. So look, and again in the title, I'm also indicating the contrasting experience of people like TKO Sam. So I do want to contrast this to the incredibly phony, incredibly manipulative role of people like TKO Sam in catering to the fantasies of the audience and in fictionalizing your experience, fictionalizing and commodifying your experience, right? I think that's something really poisonous and damaging in the world. And again, that's why I want to talk about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp in this same video. Okay, so look, all right. So we'll just pause. Martin says, quote, you are making a mistake. You're assuming equality between men and women. No. When you make a specific point of comparison, you are neither assuming nor asserting equality between the two things being compared. That's just wrong. That's linguistically wrong. It's philosophically wrong. It's logically wrong. Okay? So if I compare, and this is a very common thing, all right, if I compare the methods used to gas people to death in the World War II period, to execute people with poison gas, right, and I compare that to the methods used to gas people to death in another historical circumstance, right, you're not saying they're equivalent. You're not saying they're the same. You're saying, hey, here's one point of comparison. So you guys may not know this. It's a somewhat famous example in the history of France. One historian claimed that Napoleon's army carried out mass executions in Haiti. So mass executions of Black people in Haiti by use of gas canisters in an enclosed space. So this is a specific comparison. Does that mean you are saying Napoleon is the same as, Adolf Hitler? No. Are you saying they're equivalent or equal? No. This is a very specific claim, a very specific point of historical comparison. And obviously, that author, he was doing it for a purpose. He was making a point. He was really asking, look, when you consider who Napoleon was and what he did, and the way people in France today glorify what he's done in history, Why aren't we just as critical? It's a point. All right. But I'm sorry, Martin. Look, Martin, I don't know how old you are. You could be 16. I have people in my audience who are 16, 18. I don't know. But you could also be 45 or 55. I don't know. Right? No. I made a very specific point of comparison. Okay. And the point is this. If a woman comes on YouTube and speaks in a strong, self-confident way about what it's like to be one of the winners in the sexual Olympics, what it's like to be one of the winners in the genetic lottery, and one of the winners in the cultural lottery, okay? She's hated for it. All right. Whereas presenting yourself as weak, presenting yourself as a victim, presenting yourself as a self-pitying sob story, that's regarded positive, right? And now the other dynamic here, which I'm going to get in terms of the transition to talking about all these other things, TKO Sam and Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. The other question is of honesty, right? Are you being honest or are you being dishonest? There could be no doubt that a large part of the public scorn against Amber Heard is simply because of the fact of dishonesty. And we have this very strange legal and cultural tradition in the United States of America. It comes from England. Falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. If you tell one lie, one falsehood, then everything you say is discredited. That is a legal tradition as well as everything else. So, all right. If you guys have anything intelligent to say in the audience, I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to respond to it. We have 33 people, 34 people now in the audience. You have a second to hit thumbs up. It's great if we have 34 thumbs up. More people could join. Melissa, if you seem like you have something to say, and I'm happy to hear it. If you want to either inform or derail the conversation, this is a good moment. And if anyone in the audience wants to inform or derail the conversation, it's a good moment.
I totally get you interpreted my
appearance,
the look on my face, but I'm just looking forward to hearing what else you have to say. And,
good.
I find this conversation interesting.
Well, look, I can involve you in that to some extent. When Melissa first got with me, so Melissa's boyfriend before myself, right? His experience in high school, he didn't go to university, but his experience as a young man in his high school years and university years was nothing like my experience, right? Now, again, I'm not boasting, but when Melissa and I first got together, I mean, my point is here, I understand people in the audience are uncomfortable doing this stuff. I get it. Melissa also was uncomfortable with hearing this stuff. So I got to see that up close and personal. And she grew out of it, but whatever. Let's say the first 6 months of the relationship, I remember she was really rattled by just the way in which I'd be telling anecdotes about different periods of time in my life. And that could be high school. It could be university. It could be living in China, because I've lived in all these different places. It could be living in Thailand, living in Cambodia, living in Canada too, though, living in Saskatchewan, where in the course of telling an anecdote that could be about something totally different, it's like, oh yeah, and then there was this woman and she tried to sleep with me and I refused her and then this happened. It's just part of the story. But I remember you were really rattled by that. And, we talked about it from different angles, but part of it was just look, this is my life. I would be lying to you if I left that out of the story. It is part of the story. It's not boasting as in itself. My point is not to deceive you that women are constantly throwing themselves at me, but this is my experience in life. And, again, for some people, I understand the whole incel discourse and all this stuff. And I've made many videos talking about that with as much sympathy as I can muster for the incels, because I think a lot of them are guys who have a very unhappy life. I think some degree of pity is appropriate, frankly. But, it really doesn't matter to what extent it's the genetic lottery, to what extent it's the cultural lottery, and I'll say what I mean by cultural lottery in just a second, and to what extent it's actually a competitive sport like the Olympics. You're actually competing with other men and you're winning intentionally, right? That's very different. All the time. So for my experience as a man, I'm not competing with them. I'm not trying to attract these women or something. And women, again, I'm dealing with female sexual aggression. They're women coming at me and pursuing me in all these different situations, and you deal with it, and it has different consequences, right? But I was just going to say, the cultural lottery is a huge, huge factor here. So already as a teenager, that I was perceived as this highly refined, highly educated, sophisticated person. Again, like as a 16-year-old being compared to other 16-year-olds, guys, like this is at a really low level. But of course, like, and yes, my manner of speaking, my tone of voice, the way I made eye contact, but like in just what I was talking about. And there was the way girls respond to it. There's also even the way their parents responded to it. Like I can remember meeting a girl's parents. This is while I was still in high school. And her mother was so enthusiastic about me. She was just like, oh, this is the guy. And I could tell the whole story about, and her mother went and got her father to come and meet me. It was like, oh, she brought back a good one. Like they were really hoping I'd be the one their daughter chose. And that girl, I never slept with her. We were never involved. Beautiful girl, by the way. But and anyway, I could tell the whole story what that scenario was. Okay, I might as well tell a little bit about it. But they had this amazing library. This family, I'd actually probably never in my life have been to a personal home that had a library like that. So I showed up at her house, and this girl, very good looking girl, going through a rebellious phase, which I'm sure her parents were sick of. Um, I don't want to tell too many details because you can figure out who this is. But she's a very good looking girl. And in terms of her style of dress and clothes, she was dressing in a very rebellious way, which, by the way, didn't interest me. I didn't hate her for it, but it wasn't attractive to me or interesting to me. But I'm certain her parents were hoping she became more of a button down, suit and tie kind of person. And nobody, apparently, like her mother told me this, and I believe her, nobody else had ever paid any attention to the library, the collection of books. As soon as I walk into their living room, so to speak, I'm amazed by this bookshelf, and I start going through the shelf, and I take off several books, and I'm discussing them with the other teenagers that are there. And then I sit down and I start doing a live reading. So I forget now what the play was. It probably was Chekhov. It was probably one of the plays by Anton Chekhov. Could have been Ibsen, something, but some high literary figure in the history of theater. But I've taken several books off the shelf. I've discussed them, and then I'm standing there and doing a live reading and putting on multiple voices for the multiple characters. I'm acting out the script, and the other teenagers, and we're all teenagers. We're all the same age. People were all the same age as me, or maybe 1 year older, right? And they're sitting there listening with interest to my performance when I'm done. That's what the mother witnessed. And she was like, this is the guy, right? So look, you guys, I was an idiot. I played Sega Master System. I'm sorry, the reality is my educational advantage of these people was minuscule, but it was enough to really matter in terms of whatever you want to call it, the cultural Olympics. And I met young women who were aspiring writers. One in particular was an aspiring poet. I met young women who were aspiring painters and artists and actresses. I met young women who had certain fantasies about the life they wanted to live as a creative artist or otherwise, and who I was culturally fit into their fantasy of the life they wanted to live. And some guy who was much better looking than me, but who drank beer and watched hockey on TV, that was not appealing to them, right? So again, it doesn't matter if you just think of this as a lottery. It's just luck, or you think of it as a competition. I wasn't competing, right? But in terms of who I was and how I experienced life as a teenager, and then how that shaped me and how that influenced me going forward, yeah, that was my experience. Okay. Now, look, I'm sure it's all on like a much shallower level when you take this experience and transplant it to Isan, Thailand. That's northeastern Thailand. We could include downtown Bangkok, Thailand. We include Chiang Mai, Thailand. We can include Vientiane, Laos. We can include Cambodia. Like you can transplant me to this totally different culture where these women, obviously, we have very limited ability to speak the same language. Whether they speak some English, I speak some Laotian, whatever the situation is. But a lot of those women also, what they're responding to in me is cultural. They can tell there's something different about me, right? They can tell I'm not a tourist, the first thing, right? I'm not an old retired man, just a lot of the white guys who are there. They can probably tell I'm not rich, right? They could tell a lot of things about me, and they're interested. Now, these women don't know Henrik Ibsen, and they don't know Chekhov. They don't know Shakespeare, just in contrast to what was interesting book in high school. They probably don't know. Anyway, what did I read back then? Arthur Schopenhauer. They probably don't know Max Stirner. They don't know nihilist philosophy or anything. They don't know any of this stuff. But my point is, yeah, there's something they're responding to. And it may be really shallow and it may be deep. And just as I said, the young women, like the woman who wanted to be a poet, but the woman who wanted to be a painter, the woman who wanted to be, models and actresses. And so I'm sorry, these were really good looking women. One of them went on to be a stripper. One of them went on to be a TV host, presenter person. They were really good looking women. But, a lot of these women who had these aspirations, right, who I was culturally fit into their fantasy, their dream of the woman they wanted to be in the future. And guess what, guys? Ultimately, it's all a fucking tragedy. Because as Bob Dylan said, it ain't me, babe. I couldn't be that person for them. That wasn't who I was at all. That wasn't who I wanted to be at all. So it's all for fucking nothing. And all those women in Thailand and Laos and Cambodia who were after me, whatever their dream was of the person they wanted to be, somewhat different, but in some ways the same. I can't be there for you. You want?
Yeah.
If you want to come on camera, you can be. Sure.
I wasn't really prepared to be on camera, but I will try my best. Okay, so something that I wanted to say that I was thinking about, in relation to how I responded.
For 6 months duration.
Yeah. To your sexual confidence, basically. I mean,
yes.
The main thing that I want to say here is that you developed the ability to talk about your sexual experiences, and although I don't know what should be the average, what should be the norm, I had not developed that.
Right.
And so number one, yes, it's interesting to think about how I've transformed throughout this relationship and how I've grown out of how I used to feel about sexuality, and things have really changed throughout the years. But the main thing that I think is just the ability to speak confidently about your experience, and for you to say no, this is my experience. That's right. That's something that you need to think through and talk through with other people. And it's really hard to find somebody that you can talk to about this.
I think that is what you need to be a performer on the internet, to be a broadcaster, or to do autobiographical writing, to write a memoir. I think it's the same as being an author. And I'm challenging people in the audience to think about what you need to be able to listen to it, to be able to hear it. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need to go on and on with examples, but just when I think about my life, I didn't have any cousins that I wanted to talk to about my sex, my experience, my sexuality, or men who had been trying.
None of my brothers or sisters, none of my cousins. I'm just agreeing that we have that in common. We didn't have those kinds of family members. Go on.
Yeah, right. I didn't have a sister. Yeah. And, a lot of people, they might not want to talk to their sister.
That's right. Too. It's just a particular relationship, but sure. Right. I've known people who come from a warm family where the brothers and sisters all talk about their private life, sex life, but neither you nor I had that. Go on.
Yeah. And I mean, at a certain point, it can be embarrassing too.
Of course.
Maybe you
behaved
in a certain way that you don't want the other person to know, you behave that way. And I guess to be more explicit about it, maybe you also care about your reputation,
yes,
what do you want to be seen as to the person that you're sharing these things with. So anyway, I just say I had not developed that at all. So number one, with experience too, I had kissed a few boys before my first boyfriend, but my first boyfriend was my first experience with everything. And then I got into a relationship with Isel, and he had just a lot more sexual experience than me. And it was tough for me to just be comfortable with that, looking back on it now, I can just say, why were you not just happy about that? Because it's great to be with somebody who does have sexual experience.
And by the way, the sex was amazing from the first day.
Oh yeah, way better. But
parenthetically, the sex was amazing. No, but look, I was just going to say though, okay, so I've got a lot to say. So you want to go? Okay, so come back anytime. So look, I know where Melissa's coming from, and I lived through all that with her. And we made separate videos talking about part of your reaction was jealousy, which I just don't want to talk about that because we talked about it in the past. And I think that does make sense in a way. It made sense that when you met me, you were jealous of me in a number of ways, including intellectually. but also in this particular way sexually, right? Like you were jealous of my sexual confidence, my ability to talk about these things in a detachment. So that's kind of a topic for everybody, and we kind of already talked about that. But this is what I was going to say is, you're skipping a significant step in my autobiography if you trace the line from who I was during high school and university to who I was in being super sexually confident and detached. Detachment is different from confidence. Like you're detached and you're reflecting in an analytical way. Who I was in high school to who I was when you and I fell in love. So what age is that? 36? Okay, let's say 30 or whatever, something like that. 36, 37, right? Something like that. Okay, because what you're skipping there is exactly the period of time in which I overcame the very real aversion I had to human sexuality, right? Which included 10 years as a scholar of Buddhism, like considering becoming a Buddhist monk and living in celibacy for the rest of my life, right? So, like, again, in some ways it's deep, in some ways it's shallow. It's the deepest and the shallowest thing at the same damn time. It really is. No, but like, keep in mind, part of my perception of human sexuality is my father was a man with tremendous sexual appetites, shall we say. He let it ruin his life. But I don't even think that's debatable. My father's sex drive and his lack of self-control, his lack of detachment, like, his lack of self-discipline ruined his life. It ruined a lot of other people's lives. Didn't just ruin his own life, right? So, like, you grow up with that. And I grew up eating breakfast with this dude. He was not a stranger to me. Like, some of my brothers, they really didn't know my father. Like, they met him a couple times. You know what I mean? Father had a lot of kids, fathered by a lot of different women. This is related, So, like, I grew up with this lesson in the destructive potential of desire, right? And then my experience with the girlfriend I lost my virginity with. So not really my first girlfriend, but you know what I mean? The girlfriend, it was so negative that really reinforced, what could just be called sex negative attitudes that I took primarily from ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. I'm just being real with you. I'd read ancient Roman philosophy, a lot of which is very sex negative, right? And, yes, I had also read Buddhist philosophy. I'd read some others. I had, Buddhist philosophy is also part of this, right? So, like, look, being real with you, there's a kind of confidence that comes out of that too. There's a kind of confidence where you're living your life like, okay, look, I know what sex is and I don't need it. And I don't care if I never have it again. Like, this is who I am. This is the moral code I live by. You know what I mean? Like, I'm out here imposing my standards on the world. I'm not competing and struggling to catch up with the standards of other people in the world, whether that's women or social norms, whatever. So there is, like, it's not that made me like a wimpy, shivering person who was scared of sex, but I had a long period of being very sex negative, right? Now, other things to mention. So I've already alluded to the fact, sure, when I lived in Thailand and Laos and Cambodia and different part in China, Yunnan, China, definitely. China is a big country, but Yunnan, China, when I was in Kunming, China, tons of women trying to have sex with you, right? Okay. But you're also literally walking past brothels, like you're walking past prostitutes. And sometimes you're having to say, no, I'm not interested. Sometimes you're just walking past, like, I hope this woman doesn't try to, I just don't want to deal with this. And sometimes you're saying, no, not interested. Don't talk to me. Like, as you go past, you're seeing the ugliness of that every day. And I'm just saying that can also reinforce those sex negative attitudes, right? So I'm just pointing out the story you told about me, although true, it leaves out this really crucial thing in the middle. And, yeah, in some ways that's a story of self-confidence on my part, but in some ways it's a story of self-doubt, self-denial, self-hatred. You know what I'm saying? For years and years and years. Jump on my, yeah, you can say whatever you want. You don't have to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're brilliant. So I think it's partly just thinking it all the way through.
Yes. Yeah.
These different aspects of human sexuality that maybe other people don't allow themselves to for whatever reasons, maybe religious reasons or their experiences, you talked about some of your traumatic experiences with, women attempting to have sex with you or rape you, like some of these experiences can impact how people view sexuality, and they just aren't willing to really think about it or talk it through with anybody. So yeah, I just, I appreciate you saying that. Like, I do think your life outside of relationships, outside of sexuality, absolutely, like, it influenced how your philosophy, your mindset, your own take on human sexuality.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, anyway, yeah. So go on.
Yeah.
The point is here, I'll be honest with you, I don't know anyone who honestly comes on the internet and talks about their own sex life as a model for other people to emulate. Like, notice the word honestly there, right? And who are the exceptions? TKO Sam. It's exactly the people who are dishonest. It's TKO Sam, it's David Bond, it's the PUA people. I just can't believe the attitude of guys that come on the mic and say, like, oh yeah, you should live like me. Like, it's mind-blowing to me, right? So, well, yeah, if you want to say more, you can jump in anytime. And again, I think, like, for me, one of the reasons why that's mind-blowing, for one thing, if I did that, if I said, like, my life, the way I've lived sexually, is a model for others to imitate, it would be lying about the tragic elements of my life, like my autobiography in general, and the tragic elements of my sex life in particular, right? But it would also be lying about the tragic elements in the lives of the women who were so drawn to me and pursued me, right? I think that's, again, whether it's at the high school level or, whatever, you talk about 40-year-old women or something, whatever. Yeah.
Well, I just was going to say, I think the contrast that I'm thinking of, where people are trying to present their experiences sexually as a model for other people to emulate.
Yeah.
One person that I was thinking of who has appeared on your channel is Abigail Shapiro.
Yes.
So that's the total opposite,
Yes.
where she's very much against, sex outside of marriage.
Yeah.
She's against basically anything other than just the traditional marriage route. But, I wanted to say also that, I appreciate what you said, that you also grew up with this example from your father and how sexuality destroyed his life. You had that kind of both. You had,
we have two words that sound very similar in English. It was both warning and warding. You know what I mean? It had a quality to it, warding off something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. But it was this huge demonstration that was in your face all the time.
Yeah.
You couldn't ignore it. The real danger of desire, of what it does to people. You know?
Yeah. Anyway, I just, I just think that's must be interesting to grow up with that example and how you react to it.
Well, look, I remember something I said that emotionally impacted my own father tremendously, was that I said to him, and my mother was very uncomfortable with this, and she tried to kind of sweep it under the rug and change the topic. I said to him, it makes you into a nihilist when you see the values that are preached to you by your own parents in your own home constantly contradicted by the world outside, your own four walls outside the front door, And I remember my mother just kind of freaked out. That was her style back in those days. Her characters changed decade by decade. My mother changed his character, but she just kind of freaked out in a tizzy. And I remember my father said, no, he's just said something really quite profound and important. And he repeated it back word for word, slowly, what I just said. He sat there and he said, it makes you into a nihilist to grow up seeing the values your parents preach to you contradicted outside of these four walls, outside of the front door. Now, obviously this can be applied to many different aspects of my upbringing and yours as well. I mean, what if your parents were just traditional conservative Christians or something? Then you go out and see what's in the real world or what have you. But yeah, in terms of sexual attitudes and so on, attitudes towards women, attitudes towards marriage, attitudes towards dating, and so on. Yes, I think you could say that it was a kind of nihilism for me, that interstitial period in my life. Felt like it was going on forever when I was living through it. And I just want to say this: it's one thing to be uncomfortable with your own sexuality. It's a very different thing to be uncomfortable with sexuality, period. All right. And I grow up, I see how sexuality destroyed my own father and destroyed a lot of other people's lives connected to my father, right? Okay. You go to Bangkok, Thailand. You're looking at the way in which sexual desire has destroyed a whole society. You go to Pattaya, Thailand. I went there because a book publishing company was there. Wasn't there at a vacation. I wasn't there. Sorry, in terms of just, I took Melissa there and I wanted her to see the reality of this, but you cannot imagine the scale and intensity of prostitution in Pattaya, Thailand if you haven't seen it for yourself. Anyway, so I mean, you're looking at a society which is dominated by the sex tourism industry, by prostitution not just sex tourism, prostitution of various kinds. You see a society. I think it is fair to say you see a society ruined by prostitution, and it's kind of a topic for another video. The effect of prostitution on Thailand as a society. You're seeing that in front of your face. So, okay, being uncomfortable with sexuality doesn't mean I'm comfortable with my own sexuality, right? It means you're looking around and you're saying, wow, there's something here I'm really uncomfortable with. And look, guys, by the way, you can criticize me on this. This is part of why I'm condemning TKO Sam, right? Like, what am I out here advocating for and what am I advocating against? This also relates, by the way, to Johnny Depp and so on. I'm saying, no, lead a meaningful life. So you look, you want to jump in, but
yeah. Cool. So, okay, my response to what you were just saying there is like ultimately the sexual nihilism, right? But the model for sexuality is no model, and to be constantly doubting, what you think about sexuality.
The ultimate game is no game. Sexual nihilism. So as much as I use the word nihilism, I've never used sexual nihilism. Yeah. Okay. Well, provocative.
Yeah. So something that I thought of earlier when you were talking about TKO Sam and some of these other pickup artists and the notable absence of the discussion of the other partner. Yeah. So, I appreciate what you said, where you said, if these are your experiences, you can come on YouTube and talk about them. Even if you are somebody who's been, a winner in what you call the sexual Olympics, people who have been successful in dating and how that's affected their lives. I think that's interesting to hear too. I want to hear both sides. I would like to hear from both the people who are failures in, the current kind of miasma that we live in terms of like, everything coming together online, and in the real world, like how people are dealing with modern dating and sexuality. Like, if you are successful, you can still come online and talk about it. But it seems to me like a different model than this like pickup artist thing, because it's one thing to talk about your own experience being successful or not successful in the dating world, but it's another thing to also talk about the other person and how be reflecting on it's just a very complex thing, and maybe people don't feel like they can talk about the other person's experience, but I feel like it's kind of important.
Just because of the lighting, I'm asking you to go back. Yeah. But look, Napoleon Bonaparte slept with a huge number of women. I think most of them are known and are on the historical record. Babe, do you want to put on those two lights, by the way? Yeah, thanks. Not every single woman Napoleon. That's fine. That's fine. Just that one's fine. Not every single woman Napoleon Bonaparte slept with is known. Okay. And I think several books have been written that were just about Napoleon's love life or just about his the women he pursued. Okay. Think about how sick it would be to write a PUA guide, a pickup artist guide, based on Napoleon getting laid with these women. And then think about the contrast to writing a serious biography of each one of these women and what happened in their lives before and after they slept with Napoleon, right? Like, think about the trajectory of a woman's whole life and what the consequences for her were. Like, maybe just for a few months, she was a concubine of Napoleon. Maybe she slept with Napoleon for a brief period, and maybe she didn't have a choice about it, by the way. And then, you know what I mean? Like, the seriousness of that. And sure, think about how different it would be to really talk about the women's lives, the full trajectory of their lives, for all the women you've slept with, all the women Tikio Sam has slept with, allegedly, assuming these aren't lies, but whatever it is. And, what did they do in the next 6 months and what they do in the next 60 years, after they'd slept with you. It's certainly a very different way of looking at it. It fundamentally humanizes the women. But I just point out today, I do think that is normal in biographies of Napoleon, like to give us some credit as a culture in the 21st century. I think today, if you read a biography of Napoleon, it will deal with who the women were and what the consequences for those women were, long term, what the outcomes were. It will not just treat those women as commodities that Napoleon traded in or something. So, guys, if you want to make an intelligent comment, now is a good time, and I can read it and respond to it. Great question. Did teachers hit on you? In university, yes. In university, I had the experience of female professors, female teaching assistants trying to sleep with me. And Matt, I'm going to be honest with you. You asking that question now vividly brings back some memories of that. It's not that I'd repressed them. I just hadn't thought about them for many, many years. Yes, in university, not in high school. Or just be honest, if it happened in high school, I wasn't aware of it. It's like when you're really a kid, you don't always know when people are flirting with you or trying to hit on you. But yes, in university, yes. And it was illegal. I mean, they were not supposed to do that, Mies asks, is Tikio Sam watching your live streams? We don't know. But, different comments have come from him, both verbally and in writing, that certainly indicate that he's aware of it, and that indicate that he is doomed and determined to not learn any of the lessons that we're here discussing and describing. So, okay, interesting question. Kimegai asks, I could pronounce this in more than one way, depending on which language I presume this is written in. Asks, quote, how much leeway do you afford Tikio Sam and others given their traumatic childhoods? When does a person's trauma no longer give them an out, in your opinion? Okay, so I'm gonna be honest with you. Again, this is one of the prerequisites for talking about any of this stuff. Okay, zero. Okay, it's totally irrelevant. Totally. Now, a much more dramatic example of a guy who's also several hundred pounds overweight is Boogie 2988, right? So he has stated on the record things about very serious, very violent trauma in his childhood, and I believe him. I have no reason not to believe him. Maybe someone does, maybe someone knows, but as far as I know, that's entirely honest and well-intentioned, his sharing that, that side of his life and his childhood. So today, you look at his relationships with women. Does that experience as a child produce leeway, as you put it? It's a good word. Does that give none? How you as an adult man treat this woman as an adult, nothing is excused by your child experience. Nothing, So here's a question from Martin, or a comment. Martin says, quote, Melissa is assuming everyone would be liberal in Canadian or American society and talking openly about sexuality, but culture matters a lot on how open someone is. So Martin, I've done a lot of research on this around the world, and I would just say you would be surprised. So Cambodia, very closed, repressive culture sexually, and very dishonest sexually. You would be surprised. Do women talk about their sex lives with their grandmothers and their aunties? Yes, and more than our culture. You know what I mean? Muslim society, repressive in some ways, but very earthy and very blunt about sexuality in others. Now, sorry, saying Muslim culture is a huge part of the world. Even if you just watch documentaries, I remember I watched a documentary that was about sexuality in Muslim North Africa. I believe Morocco primarily, maybe Morocco and places adjacent to Morocco there. And again, even the guys who were conservative Muslims, you would be surprised. I had one friend, and he married an Orthodox Hindu from a Brahmin Hindu family. And even though there are some things that are taboo, once those taboos have kind of been obviated, incredibly blunt, earthy, open culture and talking about sexuality. So, you would be surprised. It's certainly very easy because of the dominance of American cinema to think that America is the only country that's open and honest about sexuality. It's not. And in many ways, America is less honest about sexuality. Certainly, America is much less honest about sexuality than Japan. Japan and communist China, very blunt, very open, very businesslike about sexuality. I remember I was talking to a gay friend of mine. We now haven't spoken in many years, but at the time we were friends. I have had gay friends at different times, but anyway, he was one we now haven't talked for many years, but at that time we were friends. And I said to him that I felt that within Thailand, although sex was thought of as bad, it was only bad in the same way that Americans think about chocolate bars. Like, be careful. Like, if you do too much, well, it's good, but only in small doses. Don't let it get out of control. It was bad in the sense of like eating too many chocolate bars. And it was just in no way connected to this notion of your immortal soul. It was in no way a stain on your character. It was a fundamental, not that sexuality was good instead of bad, but that the type of bad was really very, very different, So that's all I'd say. Now, look, I mean, maybe there are counterexamples, but I have known men, face-to-face, personal friends or colleagues or whatever, they weren't, but I have known men who were close enough to me to really talk about their sex lives. I've known men who lived in Iran and slept with a huge number of women in Iran. This is modern Iran. I knew one guy, anyway, get into the stories other men have told me. Okay, so if you're thinking in terms of stereotypes, really talk to people who've had those experiences, talk to people from those cultures, and you might be surprised. That's all I'd say. Now, let me just ask, do you watch a lot of Iranian movies? Now, and if you did, would those movies be honest in depicting what sexuality is like within Iran? No. I don't think there's enough freedom of speech in Iran that way, right? Iranians watch American movies. So it's really the asymmetry of broadcast media that creates this presumption that all the honesty is in one culture and none of the honesty is in another. So look, let's just do a couple more comparisons because I've lived in these cultures. Who do you think's more honest about sex, the Americans or the French? The Americans or the Dutch? The Americans or the Germans? Like, if you think Americans are liberal and open with this stuff, and I'll be honest with you, it creeps me out. Being German girls trying to sleep with me, it creeps me out. I feel like they're often too blunt and too yeah. I've had German girls trying to creep on me, So yeah, I'm just saying it's But look, again, obviously, I'm not ascribing any bad intentions to you. I think it's a totally legitimate set of assumptions you have. I just think it's wrong. I just think it's false. It's incorrect. The assumptions you're bringing to this. So someone named Joe says that he's in the middle of reading my book. Great. Thanks for looking up the book, Joe. I heard a quote from Charlemagne, the radio host, Charlemagne today. And can I even quote this without getting censored on YouTube? He said, when people click on your YouTube videos or your podcast, that doesn't mean they really fuck with you. But when you write a book, when you publish a book, that's when you know that people really fuck with you. Which, when people take the time to read your book, that means they're really interested in your ideas or perspectives. So I do appreciate that. And obviously, even if a smaller number of people read my books and watch the YouTube videos, I really recognize there's a deeper level of commitment and just openness to hearing my philosophy, hearing what I have to say politically, so on and so forth. So Dekwan is now a longtime contributor to the channel. Welcome back to the audience, Dekwan. Deck One says, quote, fun fact, the domestic sex industry in Thailand is far larger than the one for tourists. And then goes on to say negative things about Pet. Okay, so Deck One, let's just talk briefly about capitalism. What matters in capitalism is not the largest market. It's the most profitable market. And it's specifically the most price inflexible market. Okay. It's true. I've done real research on this. Really. It is true quantitatively, right? The domestic market, meaning Thai people having sex with other Thai people, is larger than the international tourist market. The dollar value of the transactions, how much more profitable do you think it is per night or per sex act for the Thai people to prostitute themselves to American tourists as opposed to their fellow Thais? And then what do you think the knock-on effects and influence of that are? Look, guys, a lot of things are like this. Like within cell phones or something, in some industries, you can say, okay, well, this is the biggest part of the market, but it's not profitable. Like it's just running on a break-even basis. Whereas this part of the market, this is price inflexible, this is profitable. So that's where all the attention and research and development goes in cell phones. Maybe cell phones are a bad example. I'm just saying generally in capitalism, this thing you have to be sensitive to. Now, likewise, fashion. How profitable do you think this t-shirt was? Okay. When they make, this is probably the largest part of the market in fashion, plain white t-shirt. They have to compete with every other manufacturer of plain white t-shirts. All of the attention in the fashion industry is at the most profitable end of the market. And that's where the innovation and design and what the magazines are written, which is stuff I never buy. I'm not going to buy designer goods. I have no interest. Right. So what's influential, what matters today in Paris and Milan? It's not this t-shirt, even though you can just look at the quantity and say, oh, well, look, guys, all the money is in making plain white t-shirts and this kind of thing, practical sportswear. There's a lot of money in making military clothing, outfits, uniforms, right? Okay, if you're a military contractor making military outfits, all right, you're competing at the low end where it's just slightly better than break even, right? How profitable is it to make plain white t-shirts for the Army? Okay, now do you start to understand why there's so much attention being paid to high-heeled shoes, to designer purses, all right? Designer purses, I read a study in The Economist, and it was saying that specifically the purses were really the most profitable. It was purses and perfume were the most profitable element of the fashion industry. So purses, perfume, some of the other accessories, watches were really profitable. And a lot of the other clothes were happening on like a break-even basis to support those on a brand. They were doing analysis of specific designer brands. So now when you open Cosmopolitan magazine and you look at the advertising, notice what they're advertising. Like, it's specifically the purses, the perfumes. It's those things that have the budget behind them. Okay. So yes, it is true. The domestic industry, Burmese people sleeping with Burmese people, Thai people sleeping with Thai people. It's true, but that is not remotely as profitable as the international side of the industry, right? And that has tremendous knock-on effects for the culture, for politics, for everything else. Yeah. So Ken comments, TKO Sam is the ultimate sexual alpha top apex predator male pickup artist in the history of humanity. Thanks for your contribution, Ken. So yeah, and now Deck One comes back to a point. So again, I can make a separate short video saying this. I have a lot to talk about today in this broadcast, but I will just say again now, Sam, if you're seeing this, all right, I don't want to hear you boasting about how you've had sex with hundreds of Japanese women in general, or just hundreds of women in total, with huge numbers of women in these vague terms. All right, I want you to face up to the specific number of women you've had sex with in calendar year 2022, in calendar year 2021, or as Deck wants to suggest, in the last 5 years in total. All right. Sorry, this comes back to one of the main issues here is talking about honesty and dishonesty. Right. Now, I'm here bearing my heart. I'm here being vulnerable. Right. I'm talking about the reality of my sexuality. I'm not boasting. All right. But Sam, so I'm less than 10 years older than Sam. correct me wrong. I think TKO Sam is now 36. I'm 43. Okay. Sam, if this is what your self-confidence is based on, all right, still today at age 43, if I go to Tokyo and I have a competition with you, who can have sex with more women in the next 1 year, or the next 6 months, in the next 6 weeks? All right. And I'm older than you. I'm 43, right? Like I'm old and busted. I get that. But like if it's just insane to me that this is what you've built your public reputation, your pride on, your broadcasting career. Sam, I offered you a cage match. I offered you a boxing match. You didn't seem interested. Well, if you want to have a PUA match, if you want to have a match, see who's a better Lothario, you know this, bro. And now that's assuming we do this today with me at age 43. All right. You know, and me speaking practically zero Japanese, by the way. I did study Japanese in university, long story, but I mean, my level of speaking ability in Japanese will be close to zero. You know, you know this, all right? And then if we were actually competing at the same age, 21-year-old Isel Mazard versus 21-year-old Tikio Sam, or even 31-year-old Isel Mazard versus 31-year-old Tikio Sam, right? So yeah, there's a real strange kind of insanity and evil there. And again, if you guys haven't seen the earlier videos, I'm going to tell you why I just said that, okay? Why am I saying this, Sam? Because your delusions hurt other people. They do. It's ruined your life. You're hurting yourself. You are ruining your own life. You're putting yourself into an early grave. That's one thing. But you know what? You're also coming out here and you're lying about it. You're fictionalizing it. You're commodifying it. You're catering to the delusions and fantasies of the audience in a way that really does hurt other people. So, guys, we got someone counting how many times I mentioned Cambodia and Laos in the audience. By all means, I encourage this behavior, but I'm not mentioning it for no reason. What if I had spent the last 8 years coming on YouTube and telling you how wonderful it is to do humanitarian work in Cambodia and that everyone should do it? I just only told you the positive aspects of doing humanitarian. I told you none of the negative aspects, none of my disappointment, none of my heartbreak. Just, oh yeah, guys, you should all just buy a shovel and a sandbag and get out to Cambodia and start helping starving poor people. It would actually impact people's lives. Now, maybe 10 people, maybe 100 people, but I'd be getting emails from people saying, look, man, I heard your advice and I went to Cambodia and I tried to do this and this is my experience. It's if I were actively, packaging and promoting this fantasy of what a wonderful experience you can have doing humanitarian work in Cambodia, some people would latch onto that, right? They would try to live the lie I'm presenting, and it would really negatively impact their lives. Now, guess what, Sam? The lies you're peddling, right? For transparent reasons, they were a lot more popular than peddling the lie of, getting out and helping the poor by rolling up your sleeves and with a shovel and a sandbag, actually trying to help people who need the help. So Divish asks, totally reasonable question, but not the topic of this video. Has the second book, No More Manifestos, been published yet? No, it hasn't. So if you join Patreon, you can read several chapters. I don't think any of them are the final form of those chapters, actually. You get to read earlier drafts of the chapter. So that's why some people talk about it as if it's already been published, because they've read several chapters of the book that have been shared inside Patreon. But no, I haven't. Soon, perhaps within just a couple of weeks, it should be. Obviously, there will be YouTube videos. One of the easiest ways is to follow me on Instagram. I'll definitely be making Instagram posts announcing it when that is now shared with, when it's published via Amazon. So again, these are interesting topics, not the topic of this video, but there are topics I've known about and cared about for years. So again, Kimegai says, again, more than one pronunciation is possible. That was a bit Latin, my take on it that time. Anyway, so Kim, can I call you Kim, says that he or she asks because, as an extreme example, if you had 20 people who endured this kind of trauma as children and 20 people who did not, he or she claims you could draw a straight line to bad behavior. No, you can't. And I've done the research and I've seen it, and that's a lie. All right. So on the contrary, when you do the real social science research, you can see two different women who were captured by exactly the same pimp and put into exactly the same brothel, who were trafficked against their will, and they had totally different responses to it. You can find one woman who's totally traumatized and psychologically shattered by the experience, goes completely insane. And you can find another woman who's a completely calm, collected businesswoman who got on with her life afterwards. And we're like, literally, it was the same pimp, the same brothel, and like where they both testified in court, even like it's established as a factual basis. And you can scale that up and talk about 10 women and 100 women. No, it's just not the case at all that two different people respond to the same thing. Now, I come from a large family. My father had many, many children. Each of the children responded to my father in a totally different way, right? Now, again, most people today come from small families, so they don't see that. But it really is instructive to understanding that no, there isn't a straight line. There isn't a cause and effect relation. It's up to you. It's on you how you respond to this kind of trauma. And, sorry, I can go on and on about that. And what I'm saying now, I mean, it doesn't justify anything aside from doing the research. But no, if you want to understand how people are traumatized, how they respond to that trauma, it is irreducibly individual. There's no straight line. There is no cause and effect. And, when you're looking at kind of moderate forms of trauma, sometimes what one person perceives as a life-ending, life-altering trauma, for another person is no big deal at all. You see that a good example is experiences in the military. There are people who are really traumatized by what happened to them in the military, and you can talk to other guys who went through exactly the same experience. Like again, they were brutalized by the same people in the military, the same commander or whatever, in the same army unit, and like the same traumatic experiences were carried out. They respond to it in a totally different way. So no, and this extends to extreme forms of violence. I once read a study that just dealt with shootings and how people cope with the experience of shootings. So again, it's not exactly the same experience, but very similar. And they went through the criteria of exactly what happened in the shooting, who got shot. And, like, did both people take a bullet or did only one person? They were going through all the different categories and they did all these interviews. And different people reacted to it in a totally different way. And there were people who were in no way traumatized at all. There were people who just had a completely down-to-earth attitude, like, yep, well, this is why they owned a gun and this is why they, were prepared for this situation. And there were other people who were a complete basket case for years and said, I never thought this would happen to me. And now they can't walk to the grocery store because they're so terrified. Like they have all the signs of trauma from, basically the same experience. No. So look, guys, sorry, I've digressed on this. I hope you don't feel it's a useless digression. For some of you, that's a really meaningful digression. It's something to really think about for the rest of your life. And again, sorry, Melissa coined this term here, sexual nihilism. This is a good example of how nihilism should inform everything in your life. Don't proceed with these kinds of beliefs. And to believe in kind of geometric relationship between cause and effect there with human psychology. That's, it's a belief. It's not a religious belief by nature. But I think it's really worthwhile to take the time to challenge that, examine it, and through research of some kind, overturn that assumption. So guys, I have made other videos talking about transgender issues at length. I'm just going to use what I call YouTuber's privilege and say, please just search for the word transgender on my channel and trans and look at those videos. Just in this video, I'm not going to choose to talk about it at greater length. Someone has given me the compliment that I look like Andre Agassi in this t-shirt. Yeah. Here's a question from Martin. You were an authority on Pali and Theravada Buddhism. Why don't you publish a Pali grammar book on Amazon? I have actually made several books about Pali grammar available for free. They're not, in that sense published. But if you Google around my name plus Pali, you're going to see quite a few different projects available to download for free. And a couple of them were used in Burma. I mean, I don't know if they are anymore, but for many years, Buddhist monks in Burma were using the books I produced, where I wrote the introduction and I'd type the whole thing out and so on. I didn't, to say I wrote the book is an exaggeration, but I was the editor and I had the introduction and some things. But I did a huge amount of work on that already. None of it do you have to pay for. All of it's available for free in one place or another on the internet. More questions about Pali. I might as well take a moment to answer this question. Pali, if you don't know, is the ancient language of Buddhism. It's the most ancient language of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist scripture. Quote, off topic, do you feel that the Roman/Latin transliteration of Pali gives an accurate pronunciation of the language? Do you feel that there is a best script that gives the most accurate pronunciation, such as Devanagari? And he says he finds Burmese script to be very close. So, John, the answer is you need to be able to read them all, and you need to be able to cope with them all. Totally different phonetic assumptions are foisted onto the Pali language in each of these cultural contexts, and all of them are wrong. All of them are false. So the way people in Thailand pronounce Pali is wrong, and it's horrible. The way people pronounce Pali in Cambodia is wrong, and it's horrible. In my experience, the way new Buddhists in India pronounce Pali is also wrong and horrible, even though Marathi as a modern language is quite close to this, and so on. So anyway, thanks for the question. But the reality is you're dealing with a fragmentary, cultural tradition, and you need to be able to cope with all of it. I mean, that's I think part of the wonder and the joy of it, as you get to deal with all the contradictions between a Burmese perspective and a Cambodian perspective. And indeed, India, now there's a new perspective on Buddhism coming out of India. It's not ancient India, it's modern India, and so on. Sri Lanka, so on and so forth. But it would be just as ridiculous to look at the British pronunciation of Latin and say that it's better than the Russian pronunciation of Latin. None of them are better. The difference being that, Italy still exists. Whereas, as A.L. Basham would say in the wonder that was India, what India was no longer exists. It's been destroyed. Buddhist India ceased to exist. So the heart was cut out of the center of Buddhism. And all we've got are the surviving remnants out at the extremities. Hey, there's a little digression for you guys. You want to jump in on that, babe? Okay. I guess I'll just say one more word. I appreciate the encouragement, but if you want to know, why would I not write a book about Buddhism today? I don't know a single person within Buddhism I respect. I don't have a single friend. I don't have a single colleague. I don't have a single rival. There's nobody in Buddhism I respect. And I quit Buddhism not because the religion was bad, not because the philosophy was bad. I quit because the people were bad. So this is an interesting contrast to veganism, right? And the way I've coped with my disappointment with the vegan movement and with vegans in particular. Most people do not look at religion that way. Most people will not look at a religion and say, this religion is discredited by the particular people in it. But we do look at political movements that way. Like, you can make your judgment within the United States. You can look at the Republican Party in the state of New Jersey. Only so many people, you might think that this involves millions of people, but okay, a few hundred people are really the people making decisions that matter in Republican politics in the state of New Jersey. And you may make your decision to participate in that political party or to avoid it and have nothing to do with it based on those few hundred people. The Green Party in the Netherlands, let's say, that's going to be a judgment. It's not really about abstract principles, ideas, or philosophies, right? Maybe it's a few hundred people. It's probably a few dozen people who really matter within the Green Party in the Netherlands. And you're going to make a judgment based on those particular people. And I encourage you to think that way about everything, certainly including universities. The goodness or badness of university may come down to the goodness or badness of just one man. Small numbers of people, are responsible for the good or evil of these institutions, which have tremendous knock-on consequences for people's lives. So, guys, I'm going to switch now to talking a bit about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. We should have gone through this and kept timestamps. Okay, Oliver, when you watch this, note down the times when I switch topics, or someone in the audience, and I'm going to add in a table of contents. So people who just want to hear what I have to say about Johnny Depp can, and I guess every time I mention TKO Sam, we could have a timestamp for it, but we should have a table of contents for this video for people who just want to hear it. So Dekwan asks, quote, why does Sam use his ability to speak Japanese to feel superior to others in Japan who are not as skilled at the language? Look, Sam clings to his accomplishments as a drowning man to driftwood. Sooner or later, Sam is going to die. What are people going to say about him after he's dead? That he was a good man, that he was a kind man, that he accomplished something great, or even that he had great aspirations that he never accomplished, but that show the goodness of his intentions in this life, in this world, No. The piece of driftwood he is clinging to is that he managed to learn to speak Japanese. And when he dies, if there is a notice written in the newspapers, or if there are a few words scratched into the stone, placed over his 400-pound corpse, they will say he was a man who learned Japanese. Now, I ask you in the audience, what are your accomplishments? What are your ambitions? Could it be that in some way you also are a drowning man who to his or her driftwood must cling? If you died tomorrow, what would people say about you? And guys, I've lived through this kind of tragedy. We just had a brief comment showing the extent to which I still really am an expert in Buddhism, but in some ways I've squandered my expertise in Buddhism. There was a time when I lived my life absolutely with the certainty that when I died, whether I died that year or 10 years from now or 100 years from now, like whether I died as an old man or what, that when I died, what would be said of me was he was one of the most passionate scholars of Buddhism in his generation. These were the ancient manuscripts he read. These were the ancient stone inscriptions that he interpreted. This is the philosophy he wrote about. This is a man who devoted himself to uncovering the truth about Buddhism, whether politically or through social science research or through historical research or philology or whatever it may be. Maybe also that it would be said of me that I was a man who was a firebrand and challenged the universities, that I was an anti-establishment and indeed nihilistic scholar of Buddhism or something. Or maybe it would say that I was a philosopher, but who distinguished himself as a scholar of Buddhism and then published his own philosophy on that basis. That was completely my assumption about myself, right? And I had to let go and just let myself drown. It was heartbreaking. It was transformative in the worst way. And some of you people know exactly what I'm talking about because you've been through it too. And some of you have no idea and you can't imagine. Like, on a really shallow level, I wonder what it's like to be a woman who from the day she turned 18 was a stripper, and her whole sense of herself is of being desired by men and having men throw money at her, right? And then one day that changes, you're not a stripper anymore. And maybe you're not beautiful anymore. Maybe you gain a lot of weight or something happens, for some reason you lose that identity, you lose that social status. And maybe you didn't realize before, maybe you spent all your time before complaining that you didn't want to be a stripper, that you just ended up in this job because you needed money or something. Maybe you only saw the negative side of that life while you were in it. And, you said you wanted to be free from it and get a better job and get on with life. And maybe once you do, you realize that something's been lost. And I know this is most people don't think of it as an ambition or a boast. You were assuming that if you died, what would be written on your headstone, you were the best pole dancer down at that club or something. That was not how other people perceived you. That was how you perceive yourself. That was who you were. My point being, there can be any kind of commitment you make, right? So look, why do I say a stripper? The vast majority of women who become strippers, they have to deal with insults from their own parents, from their own grandparents, from their aunts, their uncles, their brothers and sisters. They have to deal with other people in their family, maybe everyone, maybe just a few people in their family, telling them what you're doing is dirty and bad and evil and wrong, and you're squandering your potential. You could have been a dentist, you could have been a doctor, or whatever. They deal with these kinds of challenges and insults from family. Maybe a few strippers don't deal with this. Most strippers do. And they cultivate, right? Even if it's just to defend themselves, they cultivate a sense of dignity and purpose in their life. When you stand up to your own father, you stand up to your own mother, aunt, uncle, grandfather, and you say, no, this is a life I'm proud of. I'm not ashamed of myself. I want you to respect me, and I want you to know I respect myself. And if you don't respect me, damn you to hell, because this is my life, and this is what I've accomplished, this is what I'm doing, and either you're with me or against me. I think strippers, in that sense, they were a great example of that. My parents hated Buddhism. My parents were communist extremists who 100% supported Mao Zedong massacring Buddhists. It was completely explicit. Okay, my parents despised Buddhism, and there were many ways in which my parents despised me. There's more than one level to that. My father was a failed Sanskrit scholar, failed Sanskrit student. He tried to learn Sanskrit, and he dropped out of Sanskrit. And it was a huge source of a sense of inferiority he had in his own life. And here was his son, who seemed to be brilliant and gifted in exactly the way he lacks talent, the way in which he failed. So he wanted to become a scholar of Hinduism, and he couldn't do it. And he had a lifelong bitterness about that, and it influenced him in various ways. And he had a sense of jealousy and resentment against me. Also a communist, also a maniac. There were other things to it. It's interesting. Sure, I had to find ways to stand up and say to my parents, look, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. And there's a kind of dignity in it. There's a real importance in this. And I'll always remember. So this didn't hurt me emotionally in any way. It was just hilarious to me. I remember opening up my books in front of my grandmother. At that time, one of my grandmothers was already deceased, but one grandmother was still alive. So I sat down with my grandmother and I opened my books. And here it's my own handwriting, but also photocopies of these exotic languages. So Pali, as it's written in Myanmar, Pali, as it's written in Cambodia. It looks like 6 different languages, but they're different forms. And I'm explaining to you, this is what I've been doing with my time. That's what I'm planning to do with the rest of my life, or at least the next 10 years of my life. So, and my grandmother looking at this and saying, well, why would you do this instead of, say, learning French? It was just mind-blowing to me. And I mean, I laughed out loud. It's like, how can you possibly think that a life combining humanitarian work and research and going to Cambodia and seeing the craters left behind by the Americans dropping bombs, all the things I aspire to do and things I actually did, going to Cambodia and Laos and dealing with the failure of communism and Buddhism, the transition from third world poverty to the world, whatever the 21st century will bring. How can you compare this? How in your mind is what I'm trying to do here the same as learning French? So, I'm just mentioning this was not some kind of bitter conflict to me, but I think it's a great representation, whether you're a stripper or a scholar, or you have to stand up to your parents and say, look, what I'm doing is really meaningful to me. It matters to me. Doesn't matter to you. Maybe you can't understand it, And one of the bitterest, one of my brothers, just one, and I'm just being honest, I'll never forgive him for this. I remember he said that I would be better off learning Hebrew. And it was really kind of racist in a weird way. He basically said to me that I was born Jewish and I'd always be a Jew. So this whole attempt to be involved in Buddhism was of no value. And I'll be honest with you, I'd beat the shit out of this guy today for what he said to me about that. That was really ugly. And he's not Jewish and I am, he's not in any way. He's 0% Jewish. By blood, I'm 50% Jewish on my mother's side. It's one of the brothers, it's my father's son, but he's not Jewish. He doesn't live with anti-Semitism or any of the stuff I have to deal with. And I still, this day, I'm never going to speak to him again. But if for some reason I was trapped in the same hospital ward with that guy or something, I still to this day, I'd let him have it with that. And he might not even remember it. But I'd say, look, I want you to know. So that's actually a much more, it's like, no, look, this is what I've chosen to do. So you have all those years building that up. And look, when you're the one clinging to it, when it's your ego, when it's your ambition, when it's your sense of purpose and meaning in your life, you don't see yourself as a drowning man clinging to driftwood, right? And you are. Okay. And when you're really strong, when you're not drowning, that's when you can swim without clinging to anything at all. Right? It's when you can let all these things go away. When you can say, what matters isn't learning Japanese. What matters isn't learning Chinese. What matters isn't studying Pali. What matters isn't studying Buddhist philosophy. What matters isn't studying the politics of Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand, right? I'm at a phase in my life that's about my philosophy, right? That's about my politics. That's about my language, which is just about me as an author. It's just about me as a creative force. I don't work for anybody else. I'm not beholden to any religion, any belief system, right? I'm not clinging to anything for driftwood. And when I die, right, no man can possibly describe who I was and what I was by the things that I clung to, nor by the things that I've cast aside and thrown away. Johnny Depp. Okay. Obviously, we could hit stop and hit start, and we could start a whole new YouTube video at this point. I hope someone is going to help me make a table of contents to this video. Maybe even Melissa can just listen to the video back and figure out the timestamps when we changed topic here. All right. I am not cheering for Amber Heard, but I really see this conflict in a fundamentally different way from anyone in the media, mainstream or otherwise. And so I'm inspired to record a YouTube video about it today. And in some part, it overlaps with, my critique of Tikyo Sam. All right. The public has turned their hearts against Amber Heard because she had sex with someone other than her husband. Okay. So it is currently being treated as an established fact that during her marriage to Johnny Depp, she slept with, remember his name? James Franco. Okay, now if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but it is currently being perceived as an established fact that she had a love affair with another man named James Franco. Now, I am not saying that Johnny Depp should be invulnerable and immune to human suffering. I'm not saying that he has no right to feel upset, disappointed, aggrieved, or bereaved that his wife carried on a love affair with another man while they were married. I'm not saying that. But if you were to calibrate the nature of this disappointment on a scale from 0 to 10, for Johnny Depp, I am saying that this is a 1 out of 10. It's not nothing, but it is just slightly more than nothing. And if you calibrate the type of disappointment that Amber Heard must feel in discovering that the man she married is a hopeless drug addict, that he is simultaneously and deeply addicted to opiates, stimulants, and alcohol, and that he is constantly lying to her and deceiving her because of her substance abuse. Okay. That disappointment is not a 1 out of 10. It's not a 5 out of 10. It is a 10 out of 10. There is no betrayal and there is no disappointment comparable to what Johnny Depp did to Amber Heard. Now, Am I claiming that Amber Heard handled this in a philosophical manner, in a profound manner, in an appropriate manner, in an effective manner, in the most mature and intelligent manner possible? No, not at all. I think Amber Heard was very immature for her age. And I think it's reasonable to say that she went into this marriage with the assumption that Johnny Depp would be a strong, positive, guiding presence in her life. And what she discovered after she married him was instead that she had to be a strong, positive, guiding presence for him. What she discovered was that she was expected to be his nursemaid as he drank himself to death, as he snorted himself to death, as he smoked himself to death, as he ingested mind-altering drugs, the unraveling of his middle-aged life. I ask you to sympathize, seriously, with the position Amber Heard found herself in when she discovered this. We have a great question from the audience. You don't think Amber Heard was aware that Depp was a drug addict prior to marrying him. So this comes back to some issues more than an hour ago in the video. Okay? Maybe what I'm about to say is also true about heterosexual men. Maybe. Okay, we'll deal with separately. Is this equally true of men and women? You know what heterosexual women are really good at? Lying to themselves about how the man they're in love with are going to solve all their problems. It's a gift. Okay. And women have done this to me my whole life, including even when I was in high school, right? Women can look at a man, whatever. They just feel attracted to him. They find him, whatever. They find him masculine. They find him sexy. They think whatever. It's so easy for a woman to believe, because she wants to believe, that this man is going to be the person she needs him to be, right? So, for example, if she needs a strong, disapproving father figure in her life, women will convince herself that's who this guy is, even though he may be a feckless, lackadaisical playboy. He may be the most immature person imaginable, right? Just give you an example. So I grew up with a lot of knowledge of art and museums. Do you have any idea how many women see me, meet me, they get to know me a little bit, and they construct the fantasy? This is a man who will go to art gallery openings with me. This guy knows art. He knows culture. He's been to these museums all over the world. This is a man who can put on a tuxedo and stand there holding a glass of wine and this is a man who's going to raise my social status and is going to be part of the art world with me. We're going to be a power couple in the art world. And they're wrong on every count, right? Like, it's true. Like, women who've had a couple conversations with me about art history, museums and stuff, they're women who really latch onto that. And that's what they're thinking. That's who they want me to be. And my role, if I'm being honest, is to say, it ain't me, babe. Okay, so it's just been discussed. I was a scholar of Buddhism. You don't think there are some women with the mentality of Hitomi Mochizuki who looked at me when I was a scholar of Buddhism and thought, if I seduce this guy, if I sleep with this guy, every morning it's going to be like waking up with a monologue from Eckhart Tolle. Like, we're going to be spiritual seekers together. We're going to meditate together. We're going to talk to our deceased ancestors and have reincarnation together and magic crystals, right? It ain't me, babe. Yeah, I was a scholar of Buddhism. I didn't believe in anything supernatural. I cared about slavery and social issues and politics. And, I was a scholar of Buddhism. There are women who want to see that, right? That's the man they want me to be. That's the fantasy also of the type of person they can be themselves, the type of woman they want to become, so on and so forth, right? It's very powerful. So you ask a question, totally reasonable. You're asking, don't you think Amber Heard knew that he was at least a heavy drinker, if not a profligate drug user? Oh, yeah. I totally think she knew. And I think she lied to herself. I don't know to what extent Johnny Depp encouraged her, in these beliefs. It's very easy as a man. Like, if you're Johnny Depp, so this woman has watched Johnny Depp's movies since she was a child, right? There's an image he portrays on the screen, right? I'm just saying, he wouldn't have to say much to make her think that she's going to have a wonderful life once she marries Johnny Depp. And instead, she discovers that she's the nursemaid to an alcoholic. Now, look, got to come back to this. So I said before, I'm not saying that the negative emotional impact on Johnny Depp is zero when Amber Heard goes and has sex. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's a 1 out of 10. And fellas, if you live like TKO Sam, you better be fucking ready for your woman to pull an Amber Heard on you and sleep with another dude once in a while. Okay? If you are a farm boy, I've known guys this. If you grew up on a farm and the woman you get married to is the first woman you've ever had sex with, or there was just one other girl and you were engaged to be married and it didn't work out, you can say to the woman in your life, here's the deal. You're a farm boy, you're ignorant, you ain't been with no other girls, you've only been with one other girl, and if she's the woman who marries you, it's all or nothing. If that's how you want to play the game, all right, and then those rules are symmetrical. You're asking the woman to sign up to play by the same rules you are going to play by. Okay? I don't encourage anyone to live that way. Some people want to live that way. I remember I once read a long autobiographical statement from a woman on the internet, and she said that she chose her husband because he never wanted to have sex with her. She'd been around a lot of guys who were very aggressive, and she found it really kind of relaxing and calming to talk with this guy who seemed to have no interest in her sexually. Well, guess what? They got married. That in some ways, they had a good relationship. They got along like friends. He never wanted to have sex. Now, whether he was asexual or repressed homosexual, like, I don't know. I don't know the guy. I don't know the couple. Or he just wasn't attracted to her. Whatever the factors were, she had a sexless marriage. And she had to reflect and kind of blame herself. She was like, well, this was someone who was never wanted to have sex with her. She thought it'd be a great marriage. Right? So my point is, as long as it's symmetrical and all parties are going into it, fairness. Okay, let's get real. How many women has Johnny Depp had sex with in his life? Even if he never slept with any woman other than Amber Heard, once he was married to Amber Heard, okay, you are carrying that with you into this relationship. Let's just conservatively suggest it's 500 women. Let's just suggest, total speculation, 500 women, one of whom is Winona Ryder. There's any number of famous, high-profile people he's had sex with. Winona Ryder is on one. I have no basis for the estimate. None. Okay? The real number could be 100. It could be 50. For the purposes of this video, as a thought exercise, hypothetically, purely hypothetical, let's say Johnny Depp has slept with 500 women. If that is your situation, whether you are Johnny Depp or you are TKO Sam, you have to be cool with your woman sleeping with other guys. Oh, gee, you don't believe me? What if we were talking about a woman who slept with 500 men? What if we're talking about a woman who was an accomplished and successful film actress, Lindsay Lohan? We could say a porn star. We could say a singer. Let's say we're talking about someone like that, and she slept with 500 men. And let's say, hypothetically, she marries a guy who's never had sex with anyone else in his life. Like, for him, this marriage is him losing his virginity. Okay? You've got people with radically different levels of sexual experience. Okay? I'm not saying it's going to be easy for Lindsay Lohan if this guy goes and sleeps with other people. I'm not saying there will be no suffering, there will be no inconvenience, there will be no sorrow, heartbreak, acrimony, right? Okay. But I'm saying you better be prepared to regard that as a 1 out of 10, right? You're going to be disappointed with the other person, right? Frankly, it doesn't even matter if it's an open relationship. Doesn't matter. You can have an open relationship and you can still feel sorrow that this person had sex with them. People are hypocrites. Life is unfair. What do you want? It's the reality. You can still feel bad about it if it's an open relationship and the person is not expected to be monogamous. Okay. TKO Sam can never demand that the woman in his life be monogamous. He has no basis to demand that. Look at how he's lived his life up to this point. All right. And again, so if you're a woman, you're literally a porn star or something. You're a woman, you've had 500 partners. What can you expect of your husband? Honesty, sure. Accountability, sure. Sensitivity, sure. Maturity, care, love, respect, absolutely. Absolutely. Monogamy, no. Absolutely not. You can't. I don't think it's reasonable for Johnny Depp to expect any woman to be monogamous. And I think he should have had the detachment to realize he'd married a much younger woman, a much less experienced woman, and in this case, a very immature woman. And rather than Johnny Depp exerting a positive guiding influence on her life, right? Rather than Johnny Depp being the sober, self-disciplined one, teaching her how to be sober and self-disciplined, he went into this marriage as a total mess, expecting her to be his nursemaid, her to be his salvation. He's expecting her to be the more mature party in this relationship, right? And it's just not going to work, right? Johnny Depp went into this relationship saying, "I'm broken, fix me." The reality is, obviously, Amber Heard went into this relationship not saying it, but implicitly. The reality of her situation was she was broken and she wanted her husband, she wanted this relationship, she wanted this marriage to fix her. She wanted to solve all her problems. Okay. I've got to tell you something. Maybe some men look at the women in their life that way. Maybe. It's very, very common for heterosexual women to look at men that way. This is the man that's going to solve all my problems, right? In this case, obviously, financially, he solves all your problems. I mean, he's a multi-millionaire. There's a sense in which it does solve your problems. In terms of her career, right? Of course it did. It solved all. Suddenly, she's an A-list celebrity. Suddenly, she's one of the most influential, powerful people in Hollywood, and it's explicit. It's on the record. She used her connection to Johnny Depp and having the same agent to advance her. There are some obvious ways in which it solved all her problems, and that was what she was expecting, and that she got out of it what she was hoping to get out of that relationship, right? This opens up an interesting question, and many of you will assume there's no answer to it. How do you love someone? How do you respect someone who's cheated on you? How do you love someone? How do you respect someone who has disappointed you? Right? Now, when you're talking about sex, you can. Of course you can. And for a guy as experienced as Johnny Depp, he's been there. I don't know if he's been there 500 times or what have you, but Johnny Depp should be able to look back at his own life, and he should be able to say to his wife or his girlfriend, and say, "Look, I know what you're going through here with this kind of temptation." The same way Johnny Depp, he could look back and reflect on when he was swept off his feet by Winona Ryder or something. He could say, "Look, I know what it's like to have this fame and power, and you're meeting these beautiful people, and to be swept up in it, and so on." But here's the conclusion. Here's how you've got to live. Here's how you got to, how do you love someone? How do you respect someone when they're a drug addict, when they're a crackhead, when they'll lie to you, when they'll say anything to you just to get their next fix, just to get their next hit, when they'll lie to you and say anything to you just because they're out getting drunk with their friends, when they lied to you about where they were that night, and then they expect you to physically lift you up and carry you and put you down in bed, when they expect you to clean the vomit off of them and to change their sheets for them. You think Amber Heard sleeping with this other guy is bad? Think so? In your own life, think about the closest relationship you've ever had. Some of you are married, like right now. Some of you have been married in the past. You've had some close boyfriend or girlfriend. Think about the closest person you've ever had in your life. Think about the seriousness of what it would mean if they had slept with James Franco. If they had slept with someone like that. They'd slept with Lindsay Lohan. They had slept with James Franco or Lindsay Lohan. Let's raise the stakes a little bit here. What if your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, what if they were photographed and the photographs were in the press of them arriving at the hotel with James Franco and them leaving the hotel afterwards? If them arriving with Lindsay Lohan and leaving, okay. It would hurt you. It would be inconvenient for you. Suddenly everyone knows your wife is the girl who slept with James Franco, or your husband is the man who slept with Lindsay Lohan. That might be the only thing anyone knows about him. He's not famous for anything else. It's just another person that celebrity slept with. Okay, you know what? That's inconvenient. That might have some consequences for you emotionally. Might be something you have to really think through intellectually. Imagine, by contrast, if your husband or wife disappeared for just 1 month because they were using cocaine or heroin every day for 30 days. You think you could never trust someone? You think you could never respect someone because they slept with James Franco? Really? How do you trust someone? How do you respect someone ever again? When you know they do not have self-discipline to achieve and sustain sobriety. What Amber Heard did to Johnny Depp on a scale of 1 to 10 is only a 1 out of a 10. And I am saying it is something Johnny Depp had experience with, sleeping with enormous numbers of women and significant numbers of celebrities during his life, again and again and again. And he should have been prepared to deal with it and to be magnanimous about it and to have real maturity and attachment. Okay. Conversely, what Johnny Depp did to Amber Heard, in terms of its seriousness, its severity, is a 10 out of 10. If anyone should be in prison for what happened during this relationship, it is Johnny Depp.